Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this RightCrowd's virtual talk. My name is Bart Vansevenant, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at RightCrowd. And the topic of today's session is visitor management, and to be a bit more specific, a new approach to visitor management. Now, before we get started, a few things on the logistics sides for this session. We want the session to be as interactive as possible, but given that we cannot open up all of the lines, what we would like to ask you is that if you have questions as we go throughout the session here, that you use the QA function of Zoom. So you should see, depending on whether you have a Mac or a Windows system, or whether you logged in through the app or through a browser, you should see that Q&A button either at the top or the bottom of your screen. So just hit that, and if you have a question, just type it in. My colleague Kim is on the line as well. She will monitor the questions coming in, and she will make sure that we address those throughout the session. So by no means wait with your questions until the end, just type them in as we go through the session. Good. So let's dive straight in. So the topic of today, as I mentioned, is visitor management. And if you look at the context, every organization in the world has to deal with managing visitors in one way or another. And from a business point of view, visitors represent, in most cases, an opportunity. Visitors can include potential new employees. They can include prospects, customers, business partners, and so on. So from a business point of view, the more visitors, the better. From a security point of view, however, visitors do represent a risk. And while the majority of visitors do not have bad intentions, a small portion of them, and that can be intentional or unintentional, may lead to security, safety, or compliance incidents. Examples are well known. It could be things like taking a picture of confidential information and share that with others afterwards. It can be stealing property. It can be causing an incident, a safety incident. So those are all examples of things that may go wrong during a visit and that represent the risk side of visitors. And that brings us to what we call the visitor management challenge. And that challenge is all about striking the right balance between, on the one hand, ensuring security, safety, and compliance, and on the other hand, providing a great visitor experience. So that user experience that a visitor goes through when they come on site. And if we have a look at what happened over the last decade from a visitor management perspective and what happened with regards to the solutions available in the market, you can see that the focus has really been on that user experience side of the equation. We've seen the use of tablets and kiosks that really exploded, and they have been a major improvement when compared to the use of logbooks that we knew before tablets and kiosks sort of appeared. So it's definitely an improvement. Another example of improvements from a user experience perspective has been the introduction of what is known as pre-registration processes. So either the visitors themselves or someone at your organization, it can be the host, it can be a receptionist, can use a portal interface to pre-register the visitor information. And that again improves the experience, because when the visitor arrives, they beforehand receive a confirmation. Those confirmations include a QR code. So the sort of process when the visitor arrives is being improved because they simply present a QR code, is scanned, and then the visitor gets checked in very quickly. So while these are all great improvements from a user experience perspective, we've seen very little improvements on the security side of visitor management. And when we say security side of visitor management, it's good to understand, like, what exactly are we trying to achieve when we talk about securing visitor management? There's really three objectives that we're trying to achieve with visitor management from a security point of view, that is. The first thing is that we want to ensure that we authenticate visitors. We want to know who has been on site, so that's key. Number two is we want to make sure that those visitors that arrive on site are authorized to be there. So was there a good business reason for that person, for that visitor to be there? Has a host approved something, as an example? So that's the authorization component. And then the third component is ensuring that the visitors, while they are on site, that they respect the security, safety, and compliance requirements of your organization. And just a couple of those examples of requirements that you may have in your organization. It can be visitors need to stay in designated visitor areas, or it can be visitors can never go in certain, what you could qualify as high-risk areas. Could be an R&D department or a certain production part of your facility where you have dangerous equipment and the like. And the way in which organizations typically try to sort of monitor that, like those security, safety, and compliance requirements, is by means of something that is well known and broadly used, known as host visitor escort policies. So the whole idea is if we enforce the visitors to stay with a host, we can sort of in an indirect way through the host ensure that the visitors respect these things that we just mentioned. And when we look at those three objectives, so the authentication, the authorization, and then the enforcement of the policies, and we look at what exists in the market today from a visitor management solution perspective, we see that the first two, authenticating visitors and authorizing visitors, is taken care of in most of the visitor management solutions. But that when it comes to that third point, respecting and enforcing the policies, that visitor management solutions really fall short. And the reality is that you pretty much lose all control as soon as that visitors leaves the lobby area. You do not know where they go. You do not know whether they actually stayed with their host, as your policy says. You have no track record or audit trail of what happened throughout the visit up until the point that the visitor returns to the lobby. And that's where new technologies come in, which can further improve both that visitor experience, but definitely that handle that second sort of component that we mentioned as part of the visitor management challenge, being that enforcement of the security, safety, and compliance side of it. Now, before we go into that technology, I want to quickly pause and see whether there's any questions that came in so far. Kim?
Hi, Bart. Yes, we actually have one question that came in. The question is, are there any specific industries or types of organizations that face unique challenges when it comes to managing visitors? And how can they best address these challenges?
Yeah, interesting one. So when we look across sort of the customer base that we serve at RightCrowd, there's definitely a couple of verticals that have more stringent requirements when it comes to visitor management. I can think of one extreme example. We work for a nuclear facility. They are super strict in terms of visits. Everyone needs to be pre-registered. There's screens, and then when they come on site, there's additional security tests, tests that are being conducted. So that's one example. But we also work with several banks, technology companies that, depending on the site where you go, so it may be different between your headquarters. But for example, when you go into an R&D department for some of those tech companies, they do have additional requirements. So besides the pure sort of technology side, there's also, from a process perspective, depending on the vertical, there's going to be differences in the way that visitors need to register, checks that need to be conducted on those visitors. So there are indeed differences between different verticals, but overall, I would say every single company on the planet wants to make sure that visitors are registered and that there is some form of a control of what happens with the visitors while they're on site.
Thank you for the answer. That is the only question we have at this moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Kim. So, okay, let's have then a closer look at that new technology that I've been alluding to. And what we're talking about specifically here, when I talk about new technologies in the context of visitor management, we're talking about what is called security wearables. To be a bit more specific, we're talking about what is known as digital badge holders. And let me take an example of something like that. So I'm holding one in front of the camera. What you can see here is it looks like a plastic badge holder, but think of it as sort of a smart badge. So this sort of device is going to do a number of things. What you can see is we have something inserted here, a badge. So instead of using a sticky visitor label or a plastic visitor badge, this one is an actual access badge that also allows the visitor access to certain parts of the facility if needed. But then the thing that you see around it, which seemed like just a plastic holder, is actually a smart device that is able to communicate with other badge holders and also communicate with the infrastructure and the environment in which the visitor sort of goes through. And so the whole goal of these devices is to achieve three things. The first thing that this device is going to do, it is, as you can see, it has an LED. It is going to visually show whether or not a visitor was correctly authenticated and authorized. So it's not just at the point that the visitor enters your organization that you're going to do that check, like authenticate and authorize. Through this device, everyone in the organization, when they see someone approaching, they will be able to check, okay, this person is indeed a visitor that is authenticated and authorized to be on site at this point in time. The second thing that this allows us to do is do some form of monitoring of where visitors go throughout the visit. Now, I want to be very precise on this second component. This is not a tracking device that is going to register exactly where people are and track them throughout the facility. So it's not what is known as real-time location services. But what this device does allow you to do is know area by area where visitors have been. And you can use that in a positive or negative sort of implementation. And a positive implementation, what you could say is that, and we work with a number of organizations that do that, they have designated visitor areas. So they know visitors, when they come in, they will stay within that sort of set of boundaries within the facility. And by means of very simple devices, and I'll hold one in front of the camera, we call this gateways or bridge devices. You put those out in these designated areas, and you're going to be able to ensure to monitor that the visitors stay within those areas. The other way around, what you can also do is put a device like this up in areas where you never want to see a visitor, like a high-risk area, an R&D department where you say, I never want to see a visitor there. And then if at some point in time a visitor would go into one of those areas, we would immediately see that, and we can take a couple of measures. Like we can have this device that the visitor is wearing start flashing red as an indication, be careful, you're entering an area where you're not supposed to be. At the same time, we register a security event that can be pushed out to, for example, security guard to go and look for that visitor. And then the third thing that this technology allows you to do is truly enforce what we spoke about earlier on, which is those host visitor escort policies. So these devices can be used to actually make sure that the host and the visitors stay together at all times. And I'm going to quickly pause for questions here, but after those questions, I'm going to actually demonstrate that to you so you get a better feel of how does that actually work in a real-time sort of setting.
Awesome.
Do we have any further questions, Kim?
Yes, we've had two come in. So the first one is, how can these security wearables be integrated with broader security and risk management strategies within an organization?
Yeah. Okay, so the solution that we're about to demonstrate here with these security wearables, that is a solution that can either run completely standalone. So what you do in that example is you may have existing visitor badges. You have an existing visitor management system in which you register or authenticate sort of the visitors. And then you simply slide a visitor badge into this device, and then separate from the visitor management system, this system is going to make sure that we monitor where do those visitors go, monitor those host visitor escort policies that I'll demonstrate in a second, and so on. That being said, you can also integrate this. So you can integrate this with your existing visitor management system. You can integrate this with your physical access control system, and then it will all work in a fully integrated way, meaning that at the point that you slide in this device, this badge into this security badge holder, you will automatically have a track record of that in your visitor management system or your access control system, and we can basically push events of things that we will notice throughout the visit, like being present in an unauthorized zone, or we see an event whereby a visitor leaves the host. We can push all of that information back into that visitor management system or physical access control system.
Great. Okay, our second question is, what are some of the potential privacy concerns associated with implementing these security wearables? And how can organizations ensure they are protecting visitors' personal information?
Yeah. Privacy for sure is a significant concern in almost every organization these days. For that reason, we have built in a couple of controls to ensure that privacy is respected at all times. How do we do that? First of all, the identity of the visitor does not necessarily have to be stored in our system. So you can say I segregate the two. I identify and authenticate the user in my visitor visitor management system. But in this system, I simply use an identifier of, in this case, this visitor badge to do the monitoring of what happens, etc. So we may say, hey, there's an incident related to this sort of unique number, but in our system, you will not be able to know who that person is. It's only on the visitor management side that you're able to do that validation or that mapping to the actual person. So that's one side of the equations. Like from privacy perspective, what do we store? Can we link it to the user, yes or no? And then another one that typically comes into those conversations as well is more the security side of the data that is being handled. And so from that perspective, we make sure that all of the data that we capture, communicate, transfer as part of the solution is authenticated and encrypted at all times. So encrypted while it traverses from these devices to our software platform, but also while it's being stored at rest.
Thank you for those answers. That is the only questions we have at this moment.
Good. Then I'll move to the short demonstration of what I just explained. And I'm going to focus in on that host visitor escort policy and how this solution is really the only one in the market that we're aware of is able to do that. What I'm going to do is quickly switch to this view so I can briefly show what I'm going to use as part of the demonstration. So for the quick demo, I'm going to be the host. So let's say that I'm going to welcome 2 visitors. And I want to make sure that those visitors, according to the policy of my organization, are going to stay with me in proximity of me at all times. So for the demonstration, I'm going to use 2 additional of those digital badge holders for 2 visitors. On them, we see this is visitor 68 and this is visitor 67. So when those visitors arrive at the organization, at the lobby, they're going to sign in, for example, using a QR code when they're pre-registered, or they type in sort of first name, last name on a kiosk, and the receptionist is going to hand out these devices for them. As soon as they are being activated, so as soon as this visitor badge is being slotted into this device, it's going to sort of show that green color to say like, hey, I'm representing a visitor that was correctly authenticated and authorized. The second thing for this demonstration is what's going to be used in the background is a device like this. We call this a gateway device, and that device is doing the communication between those digital badge holders and the backend software platform, which sits in the cloud. So what are we going to do for this demonstration? I'm first going to show how does this work in practice. So what happens at the start of a visit? And then we're going to simulate an event whereby one of the 2 visitors is going to leave the host, so go out of proximity, so disrespect that host visitor escort policy as we explained. So I'm going to switch to a different view here. So what you should be able to see now is on the left-hand side, my smartphone. And so for demonstration purposes, I will use my smartphone to do this. In practice, this same application can sit on a kiosk or a tablet at the reception. And what I'm going to demonstrate now is the start of a visit. Like if me being the host, want to sort of welcome these 2 visitors and we're going to start a visit, let's say we do a 1-hour visit throughout our facilities, what I need to do to make sure that these visitors are going to stay with me and that we can monitor whether or not that happened. What I'm going to do first is simply log into this application. So assume this runs on a tablet at the reception desk. You can see this button that says sign in with a wearable. I click on that. And to sign in, the only thing I need to do is bring my device, my badge holder, close to the screen. So you can see it's now authenticating and I'm logged in. In this application, I'm then going to use this, what we call tethering functionality. So that is the virtual linking of visitors to myself being the host. And so the only action I'm going to ask from the visitor, or I can do that myself before I hand it out, is I take the badge holder, digital badge holder of the visitor, and I simply bring it close to the screen. So I say add people, I simply bring it close to it. And you can see that we now have visitor 67 linked to me. Going to do the same thing with the second badge holder of that other visitor, simply bring it close to the screen. Sorry for that pop-up. And you can see that we have the two visitors linked to me. You can now see two green lights next to the visitors, and that is basically saying, reassuring, like everything's fine. The two visitors are in proximity of me being the host. That was the only action required. Throughout the entire visit, no action is required by either the host or the visitor. So it's just a visit as you would normally do. But in the background, the technology will be monitoring what happens. And what I'm going to do now is simulate one of the visitors. I'm going to pick visitor 68 for my example, and I'm going to simulate as if this visitor would leave the group, so would leave me, would wander off at some point throughout the visit. Now, not having to leave the camera here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a simple metal box and put the badge holder into the metal box and close that off. That is the equivalent of that person walking away, because the radio signal will basically go down. I'm closing this box, and what you can see now on the screen is that visitor 68 was first showing an orange amber color and now a red color. And this is my badge holder, I'm the host. And as you can see, I get a visual warning. And by the way, this device also has an audible warning on board. So if I enable that, it will also make a sound. And I'm now being warned as the host, like, hey, something's wrong. One of your visitors is no longer with you. The same is happening on the badge holder of that visitor that wandered away from the host. So that badge holder is also indicating a red blinking light, showing to everyone around that something's wrong and that visitor has left the group. I'm going to take the badge holder back out of the box, and you can see both the badge holder of this visitor and mine are back to green. So the visitor has returned. And so for the sake of the demonstration, let's assume we go back to the reception desk, and the only action required, so at the very beginning, I simply had to tap the badge holders against the kiosk or the tablet. And at the end, the only thing I need to do is hit the stop button. I'm doing that right now. And it is ending basically these tethering sessions. So very, very simple solution overall. No actions required throughout the visit at all. It's just that throughout the visit itself, this technology in the background is going to make sure that we monitor what is going on. I'll quickly, for the end of the demonstration, switch to a dashboard view to show what information we have captured while all of this was going on. And if we go in this so-called tethering section of the dashboard, so this is the RightCrowd dashboard. I know it is fairly small to watch, so you will not be able to see all of the information in detail. But under the applications, we have this tethering function here. And what you can see here is that we just, like we did that about 3 minutes ago, we simulated a visit. You can see the host. I do not have a host name here, but we use an employee number for privacy reasons. And we can see that we had a visit with 2 visitors in the session. And if I click on the details, we can see that the start of the visit, the end of the visit, and we can see that visitor 68, that we had one incident where that link between the host and the visitor was broken. If I click on the detail, you can see that in this example, for a period of 40 seconds, that visitor was not in proximity of the host. So in summary, when you use technology like this, you will know at any point in time, and you can look at this across one location or all of your locations. You can look for a specific day or a week or a month. You get an overview of all of the visits that took place, and you will know visit by visit whether or not there were any sort of events or incidents whereby one or more visitors left the host. And you can have a simple procedure inside your organization that says, if I see that a host was not, or a visitor left the host for more than X seconds or for more than X minutes, at that point, you may reach out to the host and ask for an explanation to understand what exactly happened. So that was a quick overview of this solution. And sort of to recap, we looked at sort of that visitor management challenge, and we sort of concluded that when it comes to the actual security of visitor management, that solutions that we see in the market today still fall short on that one part of the objective that we're trying to achieve with visitor management, which is making sure that security, compliance, and safety policies are sort of enforced throughout the visit. And we had a look at these security wearables or digital badge holder technologies that are new to the market that allow you to actually tackle that. So to conclude, you can marry both of those overall objectives that we discussed as part of the visitor management challenge. You can have a great user experience, but at the same time, still make sure that you take care of security compliance by using a technology that allows you to not just do controls of the visits at the point that they enter or leave the facility, but basically throughout the time that they are on site at your organization. So with that, Kim, a quick check. Did we have any further questions coming in?
Yes. We've had 2 questions come in. The first one is, would the separation indicator trigger an alert at a security kiosk or other monitoring area, or just on the host's badge?
Yeah, very good question. It's more than that. So yes, at that time, the host or the badge holder of the host will give that visual warning. But at that point, we basically create a security event in the background, and that event can be pushed out. So if you have, for example, an organization that has a security operations center from where they monitor all sorts of physical security events like doors that remain open or unauthorized access into certain areas, etc. These types of events can be pushed into that operations center as well, so that someone at that point can take an action, which can be send a security guard down to that specific location, or turn on a camera to see what is happening, what can we see.
Okay, great. We have one more question, and it's, how do you see visitor management evolving in the future? And what technologies or approaches do you think will play a significant role in this evolution?
Yeah, we think that combination, we spoke a lot about that, like visitor management challenge, and those like 2 things that you're trying to do at the same time, the experience side and then the security side. I think on the experience side, one thing that you will start to see more and more to further improve that user experience is the ability to also have the access control baked into it. And there are already examples of that, where the same QR code that you present when you come into the organization to authenticate yourself, that same QR code can be used to open a door or go into a certain facility. But then on the security safety side, we think that these security wearables and similar sort of technologies, and the more generic name is active credentials, so credentials that actually emit signals that can interact with other people, with the infrastructure, that will further sort of improve the overall visit experience and security. So you could think about not just following where people go and make sure that everything is respected from that perspective, but the same technology could also help to guide a visit, like when they get lost, or when they have to get from one particular place to another place, or a handover between hosts. Those are all things where these active credentials can be handy and help that all of that happens in a secure and a user-friendly way.
Great. Well, that wraps up all the questions we have.
Thanks, Kim. Then I would like to thank everyone for joining this RightCrowd virtual talk, and we hope to see you in the next one. Thank you very much.